Hi, everybody. It is Thursday, January 22nd. I'm so glad we can be together today for our continuing discussion of Israel's adventures in the wilderness. I was just looking back at, uh, as you tend to do around the turn of the year, in January, I was looking back, this is our 52nd class on the Book of Numbers. Some of you have been doing this with me from the very start. Some of you have joined this caravan along the way, but I think it's pretty amazing. I never kind of imagined at the beginning, I didn't know what sort of pace we were going to go at, how long it was going to take. It is pretty awesome to say we've done 52 classes already, and we've still got a ways to go in the wilderness, although the end is on the horizon, as we will see in today's passage. Um, I imagine that by the time summer arrives, we'll be done with the book of Numbers. And then we'll have to just figure out together what are we going to do next. But I'm so grateful to each of you for coming back and for being part of this with me. Um, let's dive in. We're going to turn to Numbers chapter 26 today. Um, with chapter 26 of this book, we begin in my mind, at least the final section of the book of Numbers. The topic now is going to become the arrival at the promised land and anticipation of crossing into the promised land, the apportioning of the land to the different tribes. Um, that'll be the topic over the next couple of weeks. That really takes us through these chapters. The acquisition of the land, giving it to the different portions to the different tribes. We're going to spend a bunch of time with the idea of women's inheritance, which the Torah takes up with the five daughters of a man named Zelophehad. That's in some of our future classes. We're going to focus on that remarkable story. In the big picture, here as we arrive at this chapter, the horizon is in sight. We've been traveling through the desert wilderness for a long time, 40 years at this point, a full generation in the Bible's accounting of things. Since we left Egypt, since the sea split and we went through on dry land, since we stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah, and everything we've been discussing for these past 51 classes about the adventures in the wilderness, the glories, the triumphs, the fetching, the complaints, and the tragedies that have all taken place. Two of the three leaders of Israel are gone by this point, Aaron and Miriam. We've spent time with both of them in classes in the past. Of the triumvirate, only Moses remains. And Moses, at this point, I'm wondering what you think of the character of Moses, the psyche of Moses at this point in his life. In my mind, he's a slightly lonely figure at this point. I mean, after all, his siblings, who shared the burdens of leadership with him, are gone. And frankly, so is the rest of his entire generation. Um, we recall from many, many sessions ago
You want me
that
to order you? What do you
oops, after the
what do you want?
debacle of the spies, someone's got some background noise going on, if you don't mind muting yourself. Um, the debacle of the spies, the fallout from that was 40 years of wandering in the desert while the generation of slavery dies off and a new generation sees if they're qualified to inherit the promised land to their ancestors. And indeed, that's what happened. That previous generation is gone. We're towards the end of the story here now, approaching that 40th year. So Moses looks around in my imagination and says, who are these people? These are not my contemporaries who experienced the 10 plagues with me, who experienced the standing in front of Pharaoh saying, let my people go, and the departure from Egypt. This is their kids, some young generation that's a little bit harder for me, Moses, to talk to and relate to. And when he contemplates the rest of his generation being gone, I think there's something melancholy about that. It makes me think of things. I mean, I've heard um, in some ways, it makes me think of my grandparents a little bit. Um, my my father's mother, who some of you may have met over the years. I know Debbie Cohn met her. That was a very big part of our lives, and she died 1 month short of her 99th birthday, and you know, I remember her having this sense of of taking care of all those young 80-year-olds in the building that she lived in, because she was so remarkable and vigorous even in her advanced old age. But I'm really thinking of my mother's father. I remember being with my grandfather, Ben Levin, many years ago. He's gone a long time now, but I remember being with him the day that he got. Mom, you tell me, I might be embellishing this story a little bit, but the best I recall, I remember being with him when he got a letter in the mail with a check in it. And the letter said, um, "You're the last surviving member of your high school class." And we had a little fund for stuff. And since the last surviving member, you get the remaining funds here to do with it as you wish. And in my memory, that was that shook him a little bit to realize that of your high school graduating class, you're the sole survivor. And all this adds in my imagination to the character of Moses, standing here looking out at the next generation with a mixture of emotions, pride for sure, but also this sense of distance. Who are these people? Who are they? Um, as we know, the whole generation of slavery has died off, with the exception of Caleb and Joshua, the heroes of the spy story. And we're going to say more about this the next time we're together, about the survivors, the people who get to go into the promised land. A generation has shifted. In the words of Jacob Milgram, there's a different psyche in this generation. He writes, in contrast to the faithlessness of the generation of the Exodus, this new generation is characterized by fidelity and courage. It will be successful in battle. It will be deemed worthy to conquer the land as they enter it. And so the end is in sight. And here's the end of the prelude. With the end being in sight, we arrive at Numbers chapter 26, which gives us a second census of the Israelites. This is not, on the surface, the most exciting chapter of the entire Torah. Does what Numbers does. It's another long chapter of names and, well, numbers, because the book began with a census of the 12 tribes as they're embarking on the wilderness trek. And here, as the journey is coming to an end, another census, another counting of how many people do we have here that are that have made it to this point. Um, the census itself it's an interesting quirk. Like you and I, if we were writing a book about this story, we wouldn't give a whole chapter over to the lists of names of the leaders and the numbers of each tribe. But this is a device that this book uses to show the passage of time and to frame the story. I was thinking about how Genesis has another technique. Genesis, when it wants to show the passage of time and the evolution that's happening, Genesis pauses and gives a long list of genealogies. This person begot this person begot this person, this person begot this person, and generations passed. That happens a couple times in Genesis, both at the beginning and the end of the book, to show, this kind of transition. You know, if it was a movie, there'd be a different technique, like the fade from one scene into another. This is the way these books do it. Um, However, if you've done this with me before, and you have, you know that my approach to chapters like this is, the old stereotypical Sunday school teacher would say, all right, yeah, this is a boring chapter. You get the idea. We'll skip over it. And you know that my approach is, no, these chapters are wild, that you have to pay close attention to them because they got all these weird quirks and idiosyncrasies. If it was just a consistent list of names and numbers, great. But when it breaks its mold and its pattern, that draws our attention to something, and that I find very exciting. So, when teachers used to say, oh, you can skip over this part, my disposition was always, that makes me look a little bit more closely at what's happening. Okay, so here we go with boring old Numbers chapter 26. And I've given you a link to a source sheet in the chat as well, but we're not going to get to it for a few minutes. All right, so here we go. Because of the quantity of names and stuff in here, I'll take care of the reading of this part, but I'm going to call in volunteers to read when we get to the source sheet. Let's just take in some of this material and how it sounds and how it works. And again, keep a special eye on the quirkiness of this chapter and things that seem to break the mold, that make us say, what's that doing there? Adonai said to Moses and to Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, take a census of the whole Israelite community from the age of 20 years up, by their ancestral houses, all Israelites able to bear arms. That sounds like the beginning of the book, right? In the same sort of language. So Moses and Eleazar the priest, on the steppes of Moab, at the Jordan near Jericho, gave instructions about them, namely those from 20 years up, as Adonai had commanded Moses. The descendants of the Israelites who came out of the land of Egypt were, colon, Reuben, Israel's firstborn, descendants of Reuben, of Enoch, the clan of the Enochites, of Palu, the clan of the Paluites, of Chetzron, the clan of the Chetzronites, of Carmi, the clan of the Carmites. Those are the clans of the Reubenites. The persons enrolled, 43,730. Next generation, born to Palu, Eliav. The sons of Eliav were Nemuel and Datan and Abiram. These are the same Datan and Abiram, chosen in the assembly, who agitated against Moses and Aaron as part of Korach's band when they agitated against Adonai. Remember that story? We spent a lot of weeks on that story. Whereupon the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with Korach. When that band died, when the fire consumed the 250 men, they became an example. The sons of Korach, however, did not die. The descendants of Shimon by their clans, of Nemuel, the clan of the Nemuelites, of Yamin, the clan of the Yaminites, of Yachin, the clan of the Yachinites, of Zerach, the clan of the Zerachites, of Shaul, the clan of the Saulites. These are the clans of the Shimonites, persons enrolled 22,200. Trust me, I'm not going to read the whole thing, or just a little bit more. Descendants of Gad by their clans, of Sephron, the clan of the Sephronites, of Haggai, the clan of the Haggites, of Shuni, the clan of the Shunites, of Ozni, the clan of the Onites, of Eri, the clan of the Erites, of Era, the clan of the Aradites, of Arel, the clan of the Arelites, the clans of Gad's descendants, 40,500. Born to Judah, Er and Onan, but Er and Onan died in the land of Canaan. Descendants of Judah, by their clans, of Shelach, the clan of the Shelachites, of Peretz, the clan of the Peretzites, of Zerach, the clan of the Zerachites, descendants of Peretz, of Chetzron, the clan of the Chetzronites, of Hamul, the clan of the Hamulites. Those are the clans of Judah, persons enrolled 76,500. You get the idea? I'm just going to skip down a little bit to show you. Let's talk about Joseph. I'll tell you just one or two of the other quirky things about it. Joseph, of course, gets a little bit more space, and there's even a forspice of a topic that's going to be coming in the weeks ahead. Descendants of Manasseh, of Machir, the clan of the Machirites. Machir begot Gilad, of Gilad, the clan of the Gilites. These were the descendants of Gilad. We skip down a little bit to 33. Now, Tzalaphachad, son of Hefer, had no sons, only daughters. The names of Tzalaphachad's daughters were Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah. Those are the clans of Manasseh, persons enrolled 52,700. It stops to tell you about this man and his daughters, like with parentheses. That's to clue us in that there's gonna be a story about these people coming in the chapters ahead. Maybe we'll stop there. There's more quirks to be found in this list. We'll talk about some of them the next time we're together. My favorite quirks, of course, is everybody knows this being the Torah. It's very patriarchal, the list. 97% of them are men. of fathers to sons. We say, weren't there any women among these 600,000, among these, people who are counted? But when the list diverges to mention the name of women, that leaps out at us to make us pay attention. The five daughters of Salafahad are one of those cases. And there's another case, which many of you probably already know about, that we'll talk about in the future also. And that is when we're listing the family of Asher here. Descendants of Asher by their clans, of Imnah, the clan of the Imnites, of Beriah, the clan of the Beriites, of the descendants of Beri, of Hever, the clan of the Heverites, of Malchiel, the clan of the Malcholites. The name of Asher's daughter was Serach. These are the clans of Asher's descendants, persons enrolled 53,400. Did you hear it? I love that. That this is not the first time this has happened either. That when we give these long genealogies, it says, oh, by the way, this guy Asher, he had a daughter named Sarah also. Okay, now I'll keep going in the list. And we stop, we throw on the brakes and say, wait, what's she doing there in this patriarchal list? And that triggers Rabbi's imagination for Midrash. We'll talk about her in the next class as well, because I want to talk about stuff here back at the beginning of the list today. Okay, so we're back at the top. Sorry if that was extremely boring. You can all wake up now and come back and pay attention, because let's go to some of the things that really grabbed my attention here in this passage. Okay, every time there's a quirk or idiosyncrasy, it's the opportunity to make midrash. So, some initial observations. First of all, it's a large list, it's a long list. But when it comes down to it, one of the words that keeps being used here is clans. At the end of each tribe, it says, these are the clans of this tribe, and here's the number. Clans is one of the JPS translation's favorite words. It's like an anthropologist word. It's a pedantic word. For the Hebrew that's being translated as clans is mishpachot, mishpacha. These are the families that kind of in the family tree of the tribe of Reuben in this context. And if you weren't counting, and why would you be, there happens to be in this chapter, when it talks about the families or the clans, there happens to be 70. That's really interesting because there's a subtle point that's illustrating. The first, well, not the first, but an earlier genealogy appeared back at the beginning of the book of Exodus, or not even, back at the end of the book of Genesis, when Jacob's family came down to Egypt. And you remember how many people there were that came down to Egypt with Jacob?
70.
There were 70, right? So something has happened very subtly, but only works if you pay attention to these lists of names. That in Egypt, there were 70 individuals, or in Genesis, there were 70 individuals that came down to Egypt. Here, at this point in the story, there are 70 clans or 70 families. Israel, having entered Egypt with 70 individuals, has truly become, by this point in the Torah, a nation, a people, enumerating in 70 different clans and families. That's a subtle point, but a remarkable one, right? That what started as one motley family making its way during a time of famine as refugees down to Egypt has emerged as a nation. And the 70 and the 70 is a nice parallel. Okay, now let's get a little more personal. Anybody want to say anything about the first verse in this chapter where it says, God said to whom? God talks to Moses all the time throughout this book. It's unremarkable to say God spoke to Moses. But here, excuse me, here we read, God spoke to Moses and to Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest. Is that notable? I think it is. Here's a new figure, Eleazar, Aaron's third son, because you remember his brothers, the first two sons of Aaron, died really tragically in the incident, Nadav and Abihu, in the incident in the tabernacle. But now And Aaron, the priest, is gone. There's something notable about God speaks to Moses and to Eleazar, representing the next generation, representing the generation that didn't know slavery, that didn't know the miracles and wonders of splitting of the sea and the 10 plagues and stuff like that. But the generation that's going to inherit the promised land, yeah, God speaks to him too. And I think there's a spiritual, very subtle again. The Torah doesn't draw attention to it. It says, and God spoke to Moses and to Eleazar. And this is new. This draws our attention. I want to see if people want to respond to that. I see Renata wants to respond to that. So, Renata, go ahead.
So my question is, what happened to Aaron?
I'm sorry?
What happened to Aaron?
Aaron died back in chapter, what chapter was it?
He died. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. We spent time a couple months ago with the death of Aaron, and it was
Oh,
a,
I guess I
it was a
wasn't with you.
powerful story. Yeah, and
I
it's a
don't
powerful
remember Aaron
story.
dying. That's why I couldn't understand what happened to Aaron. He
Yep.
was Moses' older brother.
Yes. And the priest who officiate, he was, you know, the Torah talks about three leaders that brought Israel out of Egypt. Moses, who can be seen as the lawgiver, the political leader, the one who stood on Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. Miriam, who led the community in song and in joy, and who had and for her merit the well followed Israel, the well of water through the desert, and Aaron, who was the priest who officiated at all the ritual and the sacrifice at the tent of meeting. But Miriam and Aaron are gone. And here we can hear in the text, it's subtle again, the text doesn't draw attention to it, but when it says God spoke to Eleazar too, it means when the charismatic founding generation passes away, the story doesn't dry up and stop. That access, those miracles, those wonders continue. The story goes on into the next generation. I think there's inspiration to be found in that. Judy.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me. So in verse 4, um, it says, those as the Lord had commanded Moses, leaves Eleazar out of it.
Yeah. Let's see. So Moses and Eleazar on the steps of Moab gave instructions about them, namely those from 20 years up, as God. Huh, isn't that interesting? I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah.
That didn't draw my attention, but interesting that Moses is still Moses. Maybe Carol wants to respond to that.
No, I was going to respond to something else, so I'll let you finish
Okay.
that one.
I'm stuck. It's a good point, Judy. I'll see. We can look at the commentaries and see if we come up with something about that, but I don't have it at my fingertips. Carol, what are you going to say?
Well, it always strikes me as interesting that in these censuses that are taken, we're counting from boys or men from the age of 20 and up who are able to bear arms.
Yeah.
So at 20, they're able to fight, basically.
Uh-huh.
Um, but in in Exodus, where we're looking at all the directions about the tabernacle, the Levites who worked in the tabernacle had to be 25 or up, or
Uh-huh.
25 to 50. But it always struck me as, and I realized that you could make a case that they had to be more mature to work in the tabernacle, but it always struck me as interesting that those who you could send off to be killed in battle could be younger than those who were chosen to work in the tabernacle.
Yeah. It's a great observation. I don't know what to conclude from it. But um why you have to be slightly older, slightly more mature to be able to be a priest on behalf of the people. It's a great observation. I don't know what more to say of it. Rashi has some things to say about why this census is here, because the text sounds like it's here because there's going to be a war coming. And you know there's going to be a war coming. There's going to be, before they enter the promised land, there's going to be one more battle against the Midianites, a very brutal war that's coming in Numbers chapter 31. But for Rashi, at least, this is not just about war. Rashi has an interesting comment on why this census is here, and I think it's worth pausing to hear Rashi's voice. The Rashi connects the last line of chapter 25 to the first line of chapter 26. The last line of chapter 25 is Vahi acharei magefa, and the plague was over. Remember, there was a plague after the Pinchas story that killed a lot of people. Immediately in the wake of that plague, Adonai says to Moses and Eleazar, take a census. So here's Rashi's comment on why are we having a census here now? He says this is a parable. He gives us two answers, by the way. A parable. This can be compared to a shepherd whose flock has been invaded by wolves and who killed some sheep. The shepherd then counted the flock in order to know how many remained. Remember, the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about tragedy. After Pinchas, the vigilante, averted God's wrath. The wrath was averted after lots of death and destruction because of the people's apostasy in that previous chapter. So Rashi's first observation is the census is sort of in the wake of the disaster. We're looking around and saying, who's still with us? And that's a pretty sobering thought. But he also has a second interpretation that he's going to bring. Rashi says, Davar acher, here's another interpretation about why we have a census at this point. When the Israelites left Egypt and were entrusted to Moses, they were entrusted to him by number. In other words, there was a census when we left Egypt. Now that Moses is close to death, and it was time to return his flock, he likewise returned them by number. This is a midrash, but it's a very beautiful midrash, I think. Again, the melancholy of Moses at this point in his life, knowing it's already been told to Moses that you're going to die in this wilderness. You're not going to enter the promised land. Moses, I guess, intuits that his end is near. And this census is a bit of a conclusion of his life's work. And I got to say, as I was translating, it's my translation of Rashi's comment. I put in something just that caught my attention as well. Now that Moses was close to death, it was time to return his flock. I'm giving God, you've entrusted me with your flock, the people of Israel, and my job is almost done, complete. But I'm curious about his flock, and I didn't know how to translate it. Whose flock is it? Is it Moses's with a lowercase h? Or is it the Kadosh Baruch Hu's with a capital H? And maybe Rashi wrote it on purpose to be ambiguous and to make us wonder about that. It's time to return his flock. So he counted them one more time to say, I was a faithful steward of this responsibility. Nice, right? Okay, I want to take the second half of our class to talk about one other quirk that appears in this passage. So to go back to the census, it is that obviously there was a big aside when we were talking about the tribe of Reuven. The first, Reuven, Jacob's firstborn, who ultimately don't get to take on the rights of the firstborn and do much leadership because Reuben himself was kind of a schlub in the book of Genesis. But they still get pride of place here in the census. The firstborn, Reuben, here's the number of their tribes. But then there's a little bit of an aside because there were two bad guys. There were two kind of notorious characters that came out of the tribe of Reuben. That was Datan and Aviram. We spoke about them. They were two of the ringleaders during the Korach rebellion. Everybody remembers Korach. Not so many people remember the names Datan and Aviram, unless you do this with me every week. And then we know. But they were two of the ringleaders in that rebellion at that time. So These are the same Datan and Abiram who rose up as part of Korach's band. It's like the text is reminding us. It interrupts the flow of the census to remind us of that incident as if we could have forgotten. And the earth opened up and swallowed them up with Korach. We couldn't forget that. That's one of the most cinematic moments in the whole book that we've been studying together. And it consumed 250 men, and they became an example. All of that, I guess it's weird that the census got interrupted to say this, but it fits. It's not that weird. And then there's this verse. The sons of Korach, however, did not die. This is a strange insertion. First of all, on its surface is why did it need to tell us this? Why is this here? But there's also something else strange about this as well. Was Korach a member of the tribe of Reuven? He was not. Do you remember what tribe Korach was part of?
He was a Levite.
He was. That's right. Because part of the um, subtle power of that rebellion was Korach. It was an intra-family rebellion. Korach was rebelling against his cousins, Moses and Aaron, at that time, all part of the tribe of Levi. So the weird thing is, why is this insertion here at this point? Why didn't it mention that the sons of Korach didn't die in the normal spot later in the chapter when it talks about the tribe of Levi? We're talking about the tribe of Reuven here. It seems like an unusual insertion to put here. These are all opportunities for commentary and for midrash, if you're with me on that. Anyone want to suggest what is this doing here, both in this spot, and why did it even need to tell us, oh, by the way, the sons of Korach didn't die? That's where our sources are going to take us, hopefully, for the remainder of our time together today. Okay. Judy, you want to say something about that? Yeah, want to propose an answer?
Well, I think I have more of a little question.
Okay.
First of all, it's the contrast. You know, the sons of Korach didn't die, but the sons of Palu did die, or sons of Eliab died. And the other question I had, and I don't know why, you know, that contrast is there for us, but it's
Wait,
there.
wait. What do you mean, the sons of
Well,
Eliab and other?
well, Datan and Abiram died, right? Am I
They
wrong?
did, but they were
Yes.
also they were of that earlier generation. They were slaves, of the slave generation. I guess
Isn't
he's
it?
saying among the sons of Korach, maybe they were part of the rebellion, but because they were part of this wilderness generation, they are going to live to see the promised land.
Okay, but here's my question.
Yeah.
So Datan and Abiram, they're in this, they're mentioned, first of all, the weird thing to me that it struck me when you read it the first time is like, they're dead. Why are they part of a census? You know, a census is counting live people. But anyway,
Yeah.
because, but I mean, starting in verse 8, it talks about the sons of Eliab,
Yeah.
listing those sons, but two of those sons are dead, right? Datan and Abiram are dead. And
Yeah.
and so I just don't get why they would be part of a census. I mean, they're
Well,
telling a story.
I see.
And,
Some of the people in this census are dead. I mean, it's a census, but it's also a genealogy,
mhm.
right? I mean, it starts with Reuben, Israel's firstborn. Reuben's gone a long time,
Right, right, right,
okay? But
right.
it's also sort of giving the genealogy of these families because
Yeah.
Reuben's family split into, just like your family, splits into this child's family and this child's family and this child's family. So one of the things the census is doing is elaborating on the family tree that is going to culminate in 70 different clans among the people.
Got it.
It's still, but you're asking great questions, Judy, because why are we talking about Korach now? Why did it have to remind us of all this? And what's the point of saying, oh, by the way, Korach's children didn't die? There's a
Yeah.
lot of opportunity for midrash here, as I'm excited to show you in a minute or two. Ronnie. Can't hear you, Ronnie. I'm sorry.
Okay?
Yeah,
Yeah. So anyhow, it goes back to the promise that was made to Pinchas that his descendants um,
will be
will go
priests.
on forever. And the
Uh-huh.
interesting thing is that normally, if I remember correctly, the wrath of God punishes the generations onward. So you would think that they would have been in the generation that would have been punished and not survived.
Cool. This is close to, you're in sync with some of the commentaries that we're about to see in a minute. So that's a great observation, and we're going to come back to it as we'll see in a few minutes. Carol.
So the Torah is confusing. If we go back to Numbers 16, 32, it
Uh-huh.
says, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, all Korach's people and their possessions. So
Yeah.
on a very cursory reading, that would mean his family. But who are Korach's people? Maybe they're just the people who stood up with him.
It
Maybe
said there were
his
250 of them, right?
and
Yeah.
maybe not his children who stood up with him. But on the surface of it, and in fact, we know for some of them, I can't remember who it is right now, but for some of them, they put their wives and their children away so that when their tents got destroyed, the family was not there. It doesn't say that for Korach,
Right.
but it's very misleading. So the Torah here, I think, is clarifying the fact that Korach's kids were not part of those destroyed in the process, which would lead me to believe that they weren't part of the uprising at that point in time. And I love the idea that was just mentioned about the sins of the father carried down to the children to the third and fourth generations,
Uh,
because maybe there's a reason these kids were still alive. Maybe they're carrying on memories of things that the community needs to be aware of.
as you're going to see, you are in really good company with this amazing insight of yours. And thank you for connecting us back to the story. Right. It sounded like Korach's people must have included his children. And yet here it goes out of its way to say his sons didn't die. How can we jibe those two things? The first comment on our source sheet is going to pick up exactly that question, as we're going to see in just a minute. And you're going to see you're in some really good company, Carol. Or I should say, the commentators are going to discover that they're going to be in some really good company with you. So watch this. Barbara, one more
No, I'm
question.
thinking that Korach's name, you said before, why is he in that chapter? He's in the chapter with another bad boy. How's that?
Okay.
Reuben. But also, and maybe God's changing God's mind and giving the sons a chance. That's why they're going to live. They're going
Yeah.
to have a purpose.
Yeah. Good. This is a great lead in. Your comment and Carol's are great leads into. Let's turn to the source sheet. And I'm at the bottom of page 1, where you'll see the comforting image of Rabbi Harold Kushner.
You know what?
Rabbi Kushner, who is it on the screen? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. Rabbi Kushner, who was my neighbor here in Natick when we first moved here 20 years ago, and I used to run into him in town, and I would still get like excited like to see him because I grew up like many of us, like I grew up reading his books. He makes two comments, and I've divided it in half. The first comment is this. What's the matter?
Can I just say one thing? I just came to my mind,
Yeah.
Rabbi. I'm thinking about Korach being family of the Levites,
Yeah.
and that would be important in terms of the priesthood.
Oh, as wait till you see what's coming. Right. That the family of Korach is not insignificant in that generation and in the future of Israel. Watch this. First, Rabbi Kushner is going to say, listen, there's two ways of understanding that the sons of Korach didn't die. The first is slightly sour. Just give him the benefit of the doubt here. The first is some people say that they, the sons of Korah, carried on their father's quarrelsome ways, so that in every generation, the text is saying, in every generation, there are some people who seek to cause divisiveness in the community. Do you know people like that? Don't answer. They're saying, if you read the story of Korach and he's kvetching and complaining and challenging Moses' authority and basically dividing the community in destructive, harmful ways, and then it says, but the descendants of Korach endured. It's a way of saying, guess what? Every generation, you've got those sort of nudniks in your community, and they're harmful, and they divide people, and they're destructive to the bonds of what authentic community is. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever experienced that sort of strife in a community, it's always painful. And so Rabbi Kushner's first observation, maybe with his tongue in cheek, is saying, and there are the descendants of Korach alive in every generation, and you just got to live with it, or you just got to deal with it. But others disagree, saying, dot, dot, dot. He's going to have a second comment before we're all done today. But I think that is a valid truth to hold on to, that the descendants of Korach are alive and among us today. Full stop. Okay. We'll come back to that idea. However, in the Hebrew Bible, the Bnei Korach, the descendants of Korach, appear. Actually, they appear lots of times, not in the Torah, but in the rest of the Hebrew Bible. They appear a whole lot of times. They had a very prominent role in the temple, a couple hundred years in the future when Solomon's temple is built in Jerusalem and it becomes the center of Jewish worship. There's a place for the Bnei Korach. We start to hear about this in a very late book in the Bible, the book of Chronicles, which has in two different places that the sons of Korach have a role in the temple. In the first book of Chronicles, we read this. No one studies the book of Chronicles today, by the way. It's not the most spiritually uplifting part of the entire Tanakh or whatever, but there's all sorts of pearls and of Israelite history to be found in there. Shalom, the son of Koreh, the son of Aviasaph, the son of Korach, and his kinsmen, the Korachites, the descendants of Korach, were in charge of all the work of the service, the guards of the threshold of the tent. Their fathers had been guards of the entrance to the camp of Adonai. In other words, they've got responsibilities for the maintenance and well-being of the temple itself when it was constructed. They had a special role of honor among, as Evelyn pointed out, among the tribes, among the Levite clans. They had a special role in the temple. They weren't shunned or ostracized because of their ugly past. Here's more. In the second book of Chronicles, they have a different job. I don't know how to jibes with you, but they have a different job. Levites of the sons of Kohat, that's somebody else, and the sons of Korach got up to extol Adonai, the God of Israel, at the top of their voices. What does that mean? It means they were the choir. One of the roles of the Levites in the temple was to sing. Anybody here in the temple choir? Then that the Korachites had a special job of leading the music for a couple of hundreds of years while the temple stood in Jerusalem. More than that, if you've studied the book of Psalms before, including if you've studied it with me before, there are 11 Psalms that remember how the Psalms, before the poetry gets going, they often have an inscription at the beginning that say, this is a poem that was used in a specific way. Some of the Psalms were used liturgically in the temple in Jerusalem. And 11 of them have in their inscription at the beginning of the poem that this is a psalm of the Bnei Korach, of the descendants of Korach, or, our translator here calls them the Korachites. 45, there's 6 of them that are clustered together right in the middle of the book, 44 through 49, that begin. They say, Lamnatseach, for the leader, Livnei Korach, of the Korachites. They would sing this song in the temple. And there's a bunch of others too, a total of 11 that are ascribed to this group, the Bnei Korach. And there's archaeological evidence that backs this up too, that people have found inscriptions on bowls and stuff in ancient Israel that say the Bnei Korach who worked in the temple and led the music in the temple. So not only did they not die, apparently, to Evelyn's point, as the tribe of Levi, they went on to have this important role in praising God at the center of the universe in the temple in Jerusalem. What do you make of that? The Bnei Korach over and over again are mentioned throughout the book of Psalms and throughout the Bible. In fact, the Torah doesn't even find it remarkable. It doesn't explain why the Bnei Korach are singing in the temple. It just says it really matter-of-factly. And the Bnei Korach, these are the Psalms that were associated with them. Well, the Bible doesn't find it remarkable, but the rabbis do. And the rabbis have a few things to say about it. Hey, Judy Hadley, can I call upon you to read for us? Because
Sure.
because I need a reader. There's an amazing passage in the Talmud that I think relates to this. This one it doesn't specifically mention the descendants of Korach. This is my sort of free association. But this idea that in their past, these Bnei Korach had this, I mean, there is no denying the story of Korach in Numbers is one of the tragedies of the book. It's one of the most painful moments in the entire Torah. And here we have their descendants, their great, 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 great grandchildren of those wicked people singing to God in the temple. What do we make of that? Well, what I make of that is it made me think of this wonderful passage from the Talmud. Judy, would you read it for us? And this is a powerful passage that I think is really worth remembering. Very much to that point that that Ronnie made and Carol made about parents, about the sins of the parents being passed on to the children. Watch this, Judy.
Okay. Our rabbis taught Naaman the Aramean was a ger toshav, a righteous Gentile living among the Jews.
I'm not going to retell the story right now, but you got to just take it on trust or go look up the passage in the Bible that Naaman the Aramean was a villain in a particular story in the second book of Kings at the time of the prophet Elisha. Keep that in mind, okay? Nabuzaradan in the next line, also one of the Babylonian officers who is a villain of the story. And go ahead.
And he was a ger tzedek, a convert to Judaism. Some of the defendants of Sisera and Judges 4 studied Torah in Jerusalem. Some of the descendants of Sennacherib taught the Torah publicly. And who were they? Shemaiah and Avtalion, teachers of Hillel. Some of the descendants of Haman studied Torah in Bnei Barak.
Let's stop there. The passage goes on. There's more to say, but let's stop there for a second. If you're not familiar with all those names, I know you're familiar with at least one of them, right? That these are the arch villains of the Bible. And it's going through them one by one. Naaman, Nebuzaradan. These were vicious figures, but they seem to be able to change. And then it shifts. The descendants of, do you remember Sisera? Sisera is the guy in the book of Judges, one of the enemy generals who was determined to wipe out the Israelites until a hero named Yael, stabbed him in the head with a tent peg and killed him. But he is also seen as an arch villain against the Jews. But his descendants studied Torah in Jerusalem. Wow. The descendants of Sennacherib. Sennacherib was the Assyrian king who destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel in the 8th century BCE. Some of his descendants, they say, taught Torah publicly. And not only did they teach Torah publicly, they were famous, not rabbis because it's before the rabbis. Avtalion and Shemaiah are major figures in the Mishnah who are considered the two leaders of their generation, and they're the teachers of the great Hillel. And then, in case you didn't get the point yet, remember Haman from the Purim story. Some of his descendants studied Torah in Bnei Brak, presumably with Rabbi Akiva. Amazing passage. What is this? What's the lesson that we're supposed to take away from this? And Ronnie, it has to do with your comment from before. What's the lesson we're supposed to take? It's an astonishing thing to say. I mean, if you want to translate this to 21st century life, you got to pick the most vicious, sadistic enemies of the people. And then imagine that their children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren went and joined your synagogue and studied Torah and on Shabbat morning with you. Barbara, what do you do with that?
I'm just thinking that it shows us that we don't have to follow in the sins of our fathers and mothers, that we can pick a different path. And maybe I was thinking if something had happened differently in like Haman's life, for instance, maybe he wouldn't have done and been as evil as he was. And I could say that for all of the people, that maybe something happened and they had a chance to go one way or the other. And
Fabulous.
That's why it's capable for the descendants to be able to go for the good.
Fabulous, beautiful. Ronnie, you put this on the table. What do you think about this passage from the Talmud?
Well, going back to the divisiveness of the two that we previously spoke about, that was still with us. So the observation was made that divisiveness is still with us. And now we're seeing Haman, and that to me is evil. So there is divisive and evil forces still with us.
Right. But this is like the opposite message. This is the message of when it says they survived, it means not that they survived to continue their parents' work of divisiveness. It says they survived for the good. They survived and endured and became part of the Israelite community and its holy mission.
How do you reconcile Haman being part of the surviving and being part of our community?
Not Haman, his
descendants.
His descendants.
Yes, are still with us.
And they said, not just with us, they became Torah scholars.
I don't understand.
Well, I think I'll go back to, it's a very important point. So I appreciate you telling me you don't understand it. I go back to what we just said, that what Barbara said. I think the idea is your past is not necessarily your destiny. Easier said than done. I mean, the whole industry of psychotherapy is based on trying to break generations of dysfunction. But the idea is just because your ancestors were dysfunctional doesn't mean that is your destiny. You can break that.
Is there a genetic component? Because now I'm thinking about Haman's descent.
Sure there is. But genetics also this is a very important question. There's a wonderful psychologist, sociologist who's writing a lot of important stuff these days. His name is Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan talks about, Dr. Haidt talks about also this idea of that's not your destiny. Genetics, he said, that's the first draft. The genetics are important. They're the first draft of the person you're going to become, but they are not the final draft of who you're inevitably going to be.
Free will.
And it's a free will. Yeah, but I mean, subtle, though. He's not saying genetics mean nothing. You carry that with you, but cruelty and dysfunction is not automatically your destiny if that's what you carry with you. And that is a very hopeful, important message that the Torah is trying to inculcate here, I think. Renata.
Well, it seems to me this is a contradiction to something else I've heard. Somewhere in the Bible it says the sins of the fathers are invested in the children, something like that. I remember that somebody talking about that years ago, and this is saying that's not true. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't 100% know what you're talking about.
but I don't. I remember somebody wrote a whole dissertation on this subject. There's the sins of the fathers are invested in the children, and now it's saying that's not happening. Now it contradicts. What we're talking about today is a direct contradiction of that.
Okay.
Um,
I think,
I can't give you I can't tell you where it was or how. It's somewhere.
If you
You
come
can,
up
you
with it,
can,
email it to me because I'd be curious. But yeah, I think that this is a very important lesson from Jewish tradition. To say, even though the book of Exodus says that the sins of the parents are passed on to the third and fourth generation of their children, there are other parts of the Bible that specifically contradict that. The prophets of Israel specifically contradict that and say that's not justice, that's not the way we conduct a community, saying, oh, if your parents were bad, you must be bad. And
I agree with that, but
the
I just
proof
remember
is
that.
the
Was it
descendants of
actually?
Haman studied Torah in Bnei Brak. An astounding, astonishing statement. I want to hear from Debbie Cohn. Go ahead. We're almost out of time too, and I got
Oh,
to go to Israel, but I got to share one more thing with you
oh,
before
you
we
do
go
have
on.
to go. I was going to say this gives the Haman thing really gives you a dilemma as a Jew, though, because if we say Haman was a descendant of Amalek and we're supposed to blot out the name of Amalek, but now we have to recognize that a descendants of Haman studied Torah, then we have to determine how we're going to behave towards these people who we have a good reason to be suspicious of their motivations, and yet perhaps we are the ones we have to cut them a break. So now it's our dilemma rather
Yeah,
than
that's a very important statement because it raises the question of who's Amalek. Is Amalek just something that's biological? I understand that there's some strands in the Bible that make it sound like Amalek is just a genetic, ethnic group of people, but the rabbis um, interpreting it interpret Amalek as something, a sort of spiritual poison. Yeah, I guess that they would take exception to what you said and say, no, Amalek is not an ethnic group. To say those people are inevitably going to be the enemies of us. Our enemies, come from a different sort of spiritual poison, but not something that's,
but it's
you
again
ever
it's a
see
challenge to us to give it
Debbie, you
up.
ever see this book? Do you know who Masab Hassan Youssef is? He's the guy who wrote the book Son of Hamas.
mm,
And his father was the sheikh who was the founder of Hamas. And his son wrote this book. I can't recommend. He's a fascinating character. The book's a terribly written book, so I can't really recommend the book. But he disavows the legacy of violence and terrorism of his father. He goes around and he converted Christianity. He goes around and speaks this message of peace, this message of anti-terror and stuff like that, this message of love of Jews and Christians and Muslims together. He spoke at my kids' Jewish day school a couple of years ago, The Son of Hamas. And I was thinking of that book too. The reason I have it in my fingertips is because I was thinking about this book too, about saying the descendants of Haman studied Torah and Bnei Brak, that your Judaism has to reject the idea that your biological legacy is your destiny, that you're not condemned to a future of hate and violence and destruction just because that's who your ancestors were. I would die on that hill. I mean, I think that's a really, really important message, important ethical value in Judaism. Listen, folks, I see your hands. Give me one more second because I want to wrap it up and I want to share one more important comment on the source sheet. We got to go back to Rabbi Kushner. Speaking of profoundly ethical and moral voices. There was an addendum, by the way, to the Talmud text that does mitigate this a little bit. Debbie, you in particular might want to say, how far does this really go? If Hitler's grandchild wanted to join your temple saying, no, 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 I've repented, would you really, how cool would you be with that? There is a addendum to the Talmud text that says, do we take this, is this 100% true? But I'll leave that for you to read on your own. Rabbi Kushner said he had two interpretations. about the sons of Korach didn't die. One was a little bit negative. Yeah, they're always going to be there. But he's got a positive interpretation as well. And this is a point that I want us to wrap up on. So back to Rabbi Kushner. This is his second interpretation. The sons of Korach didn't die. They, the sons of Korach, learned their lesson and repented, and later composed and sang half a dozen psalms. He was wrong on that account. It was 11 psalms. But unfortunately, I can't tell Rabbi Kushner that. Um, this goes back to, I think it was Debbie's comment. No, it was Carol's comment before about how come weren't they involved with their father's rebellion? This interpretation, Carol, says they were involved with the rebellion, but then they did teshuvah for it. That's why
Right.
they didn't die. Weren't you waiting to hear that? That's why they didn't get swallowed. They were involved in it initially and then said, wait a minute, this is wrong, and did teshuvah. And that's an important Jewish value also. You've done damage in the past. Well, guess what? In the present, start getting to work on repairing, because that's not necessarily being a lifetime of destruction is not what anyone is destined or doomed to do either. So anyway, Rabbi Kushner says it better than I can at this point. They learned their lesson and repented, and later composed and sang 11 psalms. These include Psalm 47, which is recited traditionally before the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and Psalm 49, which is always read in a shiva house, in a house of mourning. This demonstrates that teshuvah, repentance, is possible, and people can change their ways, especially as they confront mortality. A lesson that the descendants of Korach, may well have learned from their ancestors' fate. They represent the capacity of people to rise above the circumstance of their birth and upbringing. That's what I was trying to say all along. Everybody, this is an important Jewish primary value. The ability to rise above the circumstance of birth, upbringing, your past is not your destiny if you don't want it to be. Easier said than done, of course. Sometimes it takes a lot of work, but it doesn't have to be our fate. Just in my final thoughts here is we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think these are important moral values in Judaism. But I also want to point out how these values were able to be discovered by the commentaries in this boring chapter. This chapter of just the long numbers and names of the census. The Jewish tradition was able to mine it for important ethical and moral virtues. That is the art of Torah study. That everything, even the long lists of names in the census, is potential fodder for spiritual truth. And I think that's worth drawing out as well. Okay, I'm done, but I'm glad I see Ronnie and Evelyn, and I'd be glad to hear from them before we wrap up. If you have to go, by the way, I'll see you in 3 weeks, and I'll follow up with you via email. Ronnie, go ahead.
Very quickly, it seems to me that the people change their ways, and they say, well, when they confront morality, does that mean when they're getting close to the time of death, that's the time they change their ways? And I don't mean to be negative. And however, while I have the opportunity, have a wonderful, wonderful time. And let us hear from you so we can Zoom if possible.
Yes, and there will be. I'll follow up with you about that too. I'm going to be teaching twice at Rabbi Nof's shul in Netanya, and you will have the opportunity to zoom in on it, and I'll send you that information, Ronnie. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that. Evelyn, you get the last word today.
I just wanted to say what I liked about the Talmudic passage was to find that there could be possibly value in the non-Jewish world, and that these people had some, that those people, the descendants of Sisera, for example, that there was something of value of them. So that gives me some insight into where the sages were.
Yeah, for sure. It's an amazing statement. Um, and yeah, it has implications also for us about how we're supposed to treat other people too. Just because, yeah, you got it. You know what to do with that. Um, that's the way we're supposed to treat others, just to remind ourselves, oh, the descendants of Haman were in Bnei Brak studying Torah is a remarkable thing to say about every person it's a remarkable thing to keep in mind about every person, every stranger who you encounter, you know. Great. Thanks, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you today. See you next time. And Yashar Koach to everybody. And an early Shabbat Shalom.
Take care.
Bye,
Safe
everyone.
travels.
Have
Thank
a
you.
safe travel.
Yeah.